Well, hello everyone. Welcome to another edition of One Plus One, your place for inconvenient truth-telling and myth-busting. And we welcome back to the show Travis Ross, contributor to IT Liberté, the Canada Files, Black Agenda Report, and co-editor of the Canada Haiti Information Project. And before I formally introduce him back, just a reminder, folks, to please share widely all of One Plus One's content, share past and present episodes, our playlists, and donate generously to my PayPal. And if you'd like a different form of donation, get in touch with me at yurismather at gmail. Or and sometimes Facebook blocks me from sharing widely, and so it's of the utmost importance that you, the audience, share widely via social media and email. And again, please help us overcome the far right algorithms and the monopoly corporate Western state media has by sharing One Plus One widely, liking us, and so forth. It's our only way of overcoming pro-capitalist, imperialist, racist, xenophobic, patriarchal, heteronormative media. So again, please share widely, and again, donate if you can. And also, folks, please do donate to my friend Chris Richards, who is struggling with unemployment, by supporting his journalism and becoming a patron of his. Trust me, folks, if you can, trust me, folks, do give up the Spotify. YouTube has all the free music anyway, so y'all can give up one of your overpriced streaming services, and please be a Patreon to Chris. It's money well spent, especially because if folks do donate to him, he and we would like to do more projects, which include traveling and do some more underground, some more on the ground journalism. So please do that. And now on to the topic at hand. This is our All Things Haiti episode. So first off, Travis, thanks so much for coming back on the show and for reaching out to me. So yeah.
It's a pleasure to be here. As I said, I've been watching your series in Africa with the director of Pamba's Good News. It's a great series. So a couple articles dropped recently, so I reached out. Yeah.
Fantastic, well, fantastic, and likewise, always appreciate the work that you do with the Canada Haiti Information Project. Now, before we talk about your article, yeah, before we talk about your article, if you can you try to explain what is happening in Haiti now? If I understood correctly from the last time you were on, the last time I had Janilo Soli on and so forth, and also Dr. Jemima Pierre. If I understand correctly, what's going on in Haiti, it's the following: uh, there is there is gang violence, but really, it's actually, the rich, mostly, five families. All of them are not Black Haitians, are basically squabbling. They're having turf wars with one another, so they use these gangs as a proxy, and it's gotten a little bit out of control. And now the U.S., Canada, and their international friends, through a UN peacekeeping mission, is going into Haiti to eradicate all this gang violence, when really they're intervening in a bunch of ridiculous turf wars, which has not been resolved yet. Am I correct?
I think there's a period of time where that described the situation pretty aptly, but things have advanced since then. Just like Dr. Pierre, I'm not inclined to use the term gangs. I think it did apply 2018, 2019, maybe 2020, but armed groups would be the more accurate descriptor right now.
Mm-hmm.
At the moment, we have a quote unquote interim government governing Haiti. The Transitional Presidential Council, which was installed by Washington through CARICOM. It was a kind of a collection of political parties all beholden to the United States to one degree or another.
Yeah.
With the exception of Lavalas, who lost a lot of credit, I think, kind of across the board by joining this Transitional Presidential Council. Within months of this council being in charge, it was one accusation of corruption after another. They tried to extort the head of the National Bank, or at least three did. Three of these members of the council. By the end, every representative on this council had the support from either the political party they came from or the coalition of political parties they came from withdrawn. So of the 7 members, 6 had their support withdrawn. So who do they represent anymore? They represent the oligarchs. The only remaining one who continued to have the support and was the final interim president before the council was dissolved was Laurent Saint-Cyr, and he represented the oligarchs. He represented the business community, and he was the only one whose relationship remained intact with the people who got him there. That's since been dissolved. The interim government led by Peacekeeping, who himself has a very close relationship with the oligarchs and the business community. There's a period of time where he ran the government and Laurent Saint-Cyr ran the state. So we had two open representatives of the so-called business community, the oligarchs, running Haiti. This TPC was recently dissolved. The interim government took over. And we have what was called the MSS, the Multinational Security Support Group or Support Mission. Sorry, it has been upgraded, however you want to put it, mutated into the Gang Suppression Force. The change in name didn't really change its function at first, but now we're about to see the bulk of that force is made up of Kenyans who definitely don't speak Creole, and for the most part don't speak French. Not that speaking French would help a lot in most of Haiti. They're being replaced by I'm not even sure what the proper terminology is. Soldiers from Chad or Chadians. Chad is the next country to provide the bulk of the force. There are several countries that provide either police or engineers or technicians to this gang suppression force. Some are in the Caribbean, and some are in Africa, some are in Latin America, but the bulk of the force is coming from Chad now. They just arrived, I think, like less than a week ago. The most significant feature, other than the Chadians, I suppose, is that the right term? I should look this up before we had the interview. Does that sound right?
I think so. Don't worry.
We'll let it go.
That's how I probably would say the same thing. Chadians.
Yeah. There's about pertinent to the article I wrote about Erik Prince and his new company, Vectis Global, and the drone warfare campaign, is that there's about 200 Ecuadorians who are working with Vectis Global side by side, and they're actually coordinating the drone campaign. They're pretty much at a standstill now. If they can't increase their numbers, they will not be able to defeat Vivre Ensemble, which is depending on who you speak to, a coalition of gangs. If that sounds strange to your audience, that a group of gangs would form a coalition, that's correct. It should sound strange because it's not actually what happened. But they would call themselves a revolutionary force, and they're probably something in between. That while they've had to retreat minimally in response to this increase in violence caused by the drone campaign, not so much caused by the other features of this gang suppression force. The crux of the article is that whereas the media and the officials and the Haitian interim government will say this drone campaign is going great, we've taken out so many members of Vivre Ensemble, the so-called gang members. In reality, what's happening is that civilians are being murdered by the thousands, and has had little to no effect on Vivre Ensemble other than to make them a little more careful about their appearances and where they go in public and so on, because they are being watched and their phones are being tapped and so on and so forth to figure out where they are. They haven't killed one gang leader, at least of not significance. They would call themselves generals in Vivre Ensemble. No one of significance has been killed. One was injured. And when you see the photos coming out in the mainstream press in Haiti, when there's a successful attack on the gangs, you'll get this like handful of guns, a few bodies. Just speaks to the fact that they are misrepresenting what is happening, and that is actually the so-called drone campaign against Vivre Ensemble is actually an attack on Haiti's poor. Most of these attacks and most of the violence, something like 72%, something around there, are happening in Port-au-Prince, in Haiti's capital. The rest is happening in a couple of other regions, but the bulk of it's there, and that's because that's where the bulk of the Vivre Ensemble leaders are, including Jimmy Cherisier, who's the president of they've declared themselves a political party. So he's the head of the political party. And yeah, I don't want to repeat myself. They've largely not been harmed. I can get into the HRW reports and some of the UN reports in a moment. Yeah.
Okay, so just to do a quick recap. So there was what the international community and what the Haitian elite said was an epidemic of out of control gang violence. So the UN then sent a peacekeeping mission, and the International Brigade of Western International Soldiers with blue helmets who have the license to shoot unruly Haitians. The far right government of Kenya was leading this, but now it's the government of Chad that's leading
I will
this.
pause you there that it wasn't a UN, it was a UN blessed mission. So Haiti being the laboratory for empire that it is, it was not a UN mission. It was UN blessed. This is very much an American thing. It's the United States and Canada that are funding this. That's it.
Okay.
And that's why these soldiers are coming from these countries. They're countries that are beholden to the U.S. government and they're not wearing blue helmets. So it has support of the UN, but not a UN force.
Okay. Thanks for clarifying that. But basically, this is the U.S. intervening when there's just some really stupid, ridiculous, petty turf war that's going on between the Haitian elites.
If we go back to the initial intervention, it's hard not to unpack this. There's like a if anyone who's paying attention to Haiti, they may be aware there's like a significant division on the left in North America, and this is largely over the nature of Vivre Ensemble, and almost more importantly, where Vivre Ensemble came from. We look at the period of like 2017 and 2020. 2017, this is where the second PHTK president, meaning a representative of the oligarchs, essentially a cabal of gangsters at the time, supported by the United States. Each election that brought them into power, there was a direct intervention by the United States. The first election was Hillary Clinton, later somebody else, but all to say that these were not democratic elections that brought these governments to power. They were corrupt, and their main role was to dissolve the state, to make the state dysfunctional as possible. So that when Jovenel Moise, the last elected president, so-called, in this election, was assassinated, the state had already kind of imploded. So there was no easy way to replace them. And mainly political, their parliament had shut down, the Supreme Court, so they're missing, like, I think it was something upwards of 3/4 of their judges, and so on and so forth. And along with this collapse, and this is the kind of not reported part on the left, would be that Famille Lavallas, the vanguard of democracy, the political party led by Jean-Bertrand Aristide, who was ousted in 2 different coups. The last one in 2004 that was very consequential for where we are now. That took 2004. I've got to backtrack. 2004. This coup didn't just remove. It was a coup organized by the United States, Canada, and France. They didn't like what Aristide was doing. What he was trying to do was get reparations from France, and he was trying to raise the minimum wage. So there was more to it, but these are the 2 most offensive things. So they're trying to raise the minimum wage from $2 a day to $5 a day for the average Haitian worker. And he was talking about reparations. So he was couped. Along with that coup, there were literally thousands, over 2,000 elected officials who were Famille Lavallas, who were also ousted. Many were killed, some were expelled. But it was a full-on suppression campaign of the vanguard of democracy in Haiti. And that campaign continued, so they weren't allowed to run in subsequent elections. What's often left out of the narrative, and I think where some committed activists perhaps stopped paying as close attention, is that as of 2017, Famille Lavallas herself had become a more bourgeois party. Aristide has not been involved in the party for a very long time. He runs a university, seems to do that well, but he's not involved in politics. And the four people that essentially run the party themselves are, sorry, it wouldn't be fair to say they're part of the bourgeoisie, because in the context of Haiti, the bourgeoisie are the oligarchy, but they themselves are wealthy. They're doctors, they're so on. They don't live amongst the masses. They live in the wealthy parts of Port-au-Prince. They decided to run in the election that brought Jovenel Moïse to power, the same president who was assassinated. The election was compromised. Some Famille Lavallas deputy MPs managed to get elected, nonetheless. And they were just not the same caliber of what Famille Lavallas used to be. I've written about this in past articles. They themselves, some of them were associated with gangs, and in this case, I mean actual gangs like street thugs and so on. They were no longer the vanguard of democracy. So, with that in mind, that the party that had been the vanguard of democracy should no longer be considered that. As we move into the 2020s, they decide to join this transitional presidential council that itself is assembled by Washington under Anthony Blinken at the time, and lost even more credibility than they already had as far as their authenticity as a force for positive change, as a representative of the poor, and so on and so forth. And I think that their role, or lack thereof, is an important element in this discussion. As I got to go back to your original question, if I answer this properly. What was your original question?
Just in general, what is all this fighting
Yeah, thank
going
you.
on?
We get to 2017, 2018, 2019. The states can't function. The police's role was largely to oppress the masses and to prevent large gatherings and demonstrations from happening. There is no more democratic vanguard to look to. So what has happened many times in Haiti's history, in fact, I would say this is more a feature of just like humanity, is that vigilance brigades started to form, meaning neighborhood self-defense groups. If you want to stop, if the police are no longer there to protect you and the citizens in your neighborhood, then you're either going to succumb to the violence of a gang, or you're going to pick up a gun, form whatever you'd like to call it, a neighborhood defense group, a vigilance brigade, and you're going to defend your neighborhood and flush them out, essentially, and defend your borders. This is where my view on things clashes with others who speak on Haiti, but I think the record definitely supports what I'm saying, and can't support the idea that what I'm about to say, which was among these vigilance brigades, neighborhood defense groups, was Jimmy Cherizier, who at that point was a cop. He had been accused of crimes he didn't commit, largely because he had formed this vigilance brigade and was starting to show that he was anti-gang. And there were other vigilance brigades started forming in Port-au-Prince as well. At a certain point, he decided to form the G9. And the G9 was a combination of vigilance brigades, neighborhood defense groups, and gangs who he had convinced to stop exploiting the population and harming their population and join him. Only premise being you have to stop raping, kidnapping, and murdering. So the bar is set very low for some of these gangs. Within a matter of days, I think it was 2 days, the gangs themselves that were exactly as you described them, backed by oligarchs, the tools of politicians, they weren't necessarily like a militia for a specific person. They were there to take money from whoever had to offer it in order to go do whatever they wanted, formed into JPEP. So then all of a sudden we had this mix of vigilance brigades and gangs organized into two camps. Arguably, I think this is, again, defensible and can be supported by the facts that the G9 themselves were authentically anti-gang and anti-violence, except obviously when combating JPEP, and JPEP themselves were exactly as they were described and often are described. They're working for oligarchs and corrupt politicians, and these links have already been made, not just in articles I've written, but in articles other people have written as well. Now, this led to eventually the foundation of Vivre Ensemble, where Jimmy Sherry, as he explains it, made a deal with the devil. He saw no way to move forward and dislodge the, at the time, government of Ariel Henry, who was the de facto prime minister of Haiti at the time, who was literally installed by tweet from the core group, who are just essentially a group of countries that are they're formally mandated as a support group for Haiti, but they do the will of the U.S. imperialists.
Yeah.
He saw no way but to do what he had done on a smaller scale with some of these gangs in Port-au-Prince and to absorb JPEP. He described it as doing a deal with the devil. It surprised a lot of the people who supported him, which I need to mention that despite some of the criticisms, his popularity was only mounting. From that period of G9, he was built. There was support in the diaspora. There was support in Haiti. There was support among journalists outside of Haiti Liberté. People were understanding that even the head of the union of the police of the PNH was sympathetic to him. It was quite astonishing. But when he made this decision to join forces with JPEP, to say there's a lot of skepticism would be to like underscore the reaction. People were shocked.
Well,
and I think it's arguable that. Sorry?
I said ACAV.
Yeah. He so they had an immediate success in that they were able to expel Ariel Henry, the prime minister at the time. He decided to go a little jaunt to the United States to kind of like get some in-person support for his corrupt government that was, again, only there because the U.S. had installed them. And they took over the airport, made it impossible for him to land, and all of a sudden Ariel Henry was gone. Since then, there have been some victories, but there have been a lot of failures. And it would be definitely correct to say Vivre Ensemble is not popular in Haiti. There is a base of support, which people should be aware of, and that's often in some of these neighborhoods that they control. But these other leaders, they can now call themselves generals. We have I'm going to use generals in quotes. They're armed group leaders. EZO is a perfect example where there's no evidence that they've changed their stripes, that they continue exploiting the population, continue to harm people, and are not revolutionary or do not know what's best for them. They just want what's best for them. So whereas Sherzias has some successes in turning some of these leaders, he's failed with others. The general perception, because Jimmy Cherizier is often the face of gangs in the mainstream media, that he's all powerful. But on the ground, it's simply not the case. In fact, it's the opposite. He controls a very small territory because he doesn't exploit his population. He doesn't typically have a lot of money. So it is, I don't want to only focus on Ezo, but he's a perfect example of somebody who brings in money to finance and has a large area of control and has a lot of guns because he has this money, but himself is not at all revolutionary or like looking out for the best interests of Haitians. This should be like compared to the leaders of Lavalas's decision to collaborate with the other members of the Transitional Presidential Council. The majority of them were associated with, or they themselves were active in the coup, in the 2004 coup. So when Lavalas made the decision to join in with what was called the Montana Accord at the time, I'm not going to get into that, but it is essentially a comprador group of individuals who are beholden to the United States. They're arguably doing the exact same thing. There's no greater crime that's happened in the past 25 years in Haiti than the 2004 coup. So choosing to go shoulder to shoulder with the people who undermine Haiti's democracy, like the thousands of people being killed that undermine Haitian democracy for decades to come, to say that collaborating with them is like a point of wisdom or was like good strategy, was at least questionable at the time, and now is provably the wrong strategy because this is where we are now. The U.S. has never had more control over Haiti than the past 30 years. So if we looked at Jake Johnson's recent article, he has been pushing for, that's probably too strong a word, but he definitely supports the idea of dialogue, just like I do, with leaders of, with some of the leaders of Viva Ensemble. He doesn't identify any leaders. I can and say that, like, I think someone like Jimmy Sherry is authentic, and there's other leaders who have spoken up and said, like, I'm willing to go to jail. I'm willing to be tried for my crimes, but not until the people that hired me to do those things are also arrested and tried for their crimes. And this is an important point, that if this gang suppression force, this imperialist mercenary group, successfully takes out these leaders of Viva Ensemble, then we'll have a return to the status quo, which is crushing endemic poverty for the vast majority of the population, and all the politicians and oligarchs who financed and supported and armed these armed groups will get away scot-free, because the people who know what they did.
So we've gone a little bit off topic from the article that I wanted to talk that
drones, yeah.
But again, so if you could summarize what's been happening in Haiti, it's that there is squabbling going on between the oligarchs, between these mobbed up oligarchs. They have been fighting and using gangs as a proxies because of the breakdown of law and order, because of the state terrorism that the state itself has done, the far right has done. There are these gangs or militias who fight back, and this and these Kenyan, now Chadian, and I double checked it, it's Chadian. Mercenaries are trying to stop the Jimmy BBQs and others from getting a little too uppity, right?
Yeah. So when you hear that some Haitian politician or oligarch has been sanctioned, that's usually a sign that the U.S. imperialists are frustrated with that oligarch or politician, that they're not playing the game the way it's supposed to be played, and they need to get in line.
Okay.
So the most powerful oligarch in Haiti is Rubens Biggio, who is the son of Gilbert Biggio, who is the wealthiest man in the Caribbean, has his own island. They're fine. But Andre Apaid himself has been arrested and he's detained. I'm not sure if he had been deported. I think he's been deported yet. So that's a sign, like, Apaid was, perhaps doing things they didn't approve of. They weren't following the plan. But for the most part, the oligarchy and the political class is quite intact, and always trying to find a way to appeal to the American government, to Washington, in order to get favor so that they can get the positions in government. That's essentially how this goes. This gang suppression force is there. If it grows larger, it'll be more significant. But it's actually the police, the PNH, who for the most part are leading these efforts with the so-called support of Vectis Global, Erik Prince's new outfit, the guy behind Blackwater. But it's the PNH who are doing most of the work, with the army doing a little bit on the side, but they're quite a small force comparatively. If you look at the statistics from the UN reports over the past year.
Wait. But before we get into that, but all of the but the reason why there is a U.S., Canadian, international anti-gang violent forces is because there is like a civil war, turf war going on between the oligarchs and now the U.S. and now the U.S. and its partners are sort of tired of it, so they're intervening, but they're also doing it to suppress growing rebellions and growing discontent with the Haitian state, which is far right and neoliberal.
Yeah, we get the I get the impression, and this is just an impression, that the oligarchs are starting to fall in line with America's plan. But that was certainly an apt description up until recently, with Apaid being, again, he's one of the oligarchs support. He was active in the coup in 2004, being detained by ICE. Whereas Biggio is, like I said, the family seems to be thriving. That there seems to be more consensus growing amongst the oligarchs in terms of how to move forward. The political class remains servile, as they always have been, to U.S. power. But they, aside from Fils-Aimé, who is the current prime minister, the interim government, not elected, they having trouble finding competent politicians to play the game through that at least some part of the population can get behind. They're trying to work towards elections, but you can't have an election when huge parts of your country are controlled by armed groups. That's essentially, they need, so I think this answers your question. They need to have some sort of election. It could be a fake election, it can be a selection, but they need to have something to give some legitimacy to the government. Because right now, everyone understands no one elected these people. Population doesn't really like them. So they don't represent anybody. There has to be something that gives them the veneer of legitimacy. And they can't do that as long as upwards of 80 to 90% of Port-au-Prince are controlled by armed groups, and significant parts of some other regions in Haiti are at least affected, if not controlled, by armed groups. So hence the priority now is to take out these armed groups. But there is a lack of desire amongst the kind of secondary imperialist powers like Canada, France, and so on to finance this group, or to even provide any staffing for it, which has meant that Haiti, mostly Port-au-Prince, has been at a standstill. The armed groups aren't able to defeat the GSF or the PNH, but on the other side, they're unable to defeat the armed groups.
Okay.
So there's this like constant level of violence in Port-au-Prince. Whenever the PNH decide they're going to go attack a neighborhood or whatever it may be, there'll be a spike in violence. But it tends not to change the overall picture of what's happening in Port-au-Prince.
Okay, interesting. So now explain your article, and if I understand correctly, from reading the article last night, so if I understand correctly, the Haitian police have been working with a security firm, the private mercenary Erik Prince, whose Blackwater, later Xenu or something, or G or something, later Academi, slaughtered Iraqi protesters and I believe Iraqi resistance fighters during that criminal second U.S. led invasion of Iraq. Now they and the sort of what you call the UN blessed peacekeeping anti-gang cabal led by the West and their proxies, whomever is gross
Gang
enough.
Suppression Force, yeah, GSF.
Yes, and whomever is gross enough to be an anti-Haitian has been using drones. They've been using drones in their efforts to contain, eradicate the manufactured or the semi-manufactured gang crisis in Haiti. And Human Rights Watch, a semi-NGO group long led by Kenneth Roth, they do some good work sometimes, but most of the times they're really just an extension of Washington, Ottawa, Westminster, Canberra, Auckland, and the EU, NATO soft imperialism. In your article, you say that they've been underreporting how many unarmed people have been massacred, essentially, and also to use the military jargon, collateral damage. Am I correct? Correct me if I'm wrong, and essentially explain your article.
So Human Rights Watch, who I agree with your description of them generally, this report, I would say, like, at the very least, suffered from bad grammar, because they said that 12,043 people have been killed by drones, which right away was astonishing, because that's upwards of 3 times as much as the UN accounted up until that point. And they threw in a caveat that 43 adults and 17 children were confirmed. I can't remember the term they used. Non-combatants, essentially civilians, that they were not members of armed groups. And the grammar was strange, so I reached out, and the very friendly staff there were happy to clarify and did admit the grammar was confusing. That of the remaining, whatever the difference there is, 1,183 Haitians who've been killed, that they were not confirmed gang members by any means, that they just could not be formally confirmed through their process as having not been a member of a gang or armed group, which means the number of innocent Haitians who've been murdered by through this drone campaign is likely much, much higher. Arguably, a majority of that number of the 1,243 are civilians. This lines up with what someone like Jimmy Shergier says. He'll say 9 out of 10 or something to that effect of the people who have been killed by drones are civilians. It speaks to the media reports where like they provide very little evidence they've actually killed any members of Vivant Ensemble. So yeah, the next part of that was the UN reports. The UN office in Haiti is referred to by the acronym of BNU.
Actually, Travis, before you
Sure.
talk about the UN Office of High Commissioner of Human Rights, talk to us about the Erik Prince connection to this. And for those who have completely forgotten, the gallery of war criminals in Iraq. Erik Prince's Blackwater, now called Academi. It's had several name changes, but he's basically a Christian fascist that both Reagan and George W. Bush empowered. So explain Erik Prince, his connection to what's happening in Haiti, and I also should add he's been a busy little tick and flea and human termite, meddling in Venezuelan affairs, Bolivia, Peru, and pity he finds time to reign terror in Haiti. So talk to us about that.
Also in the DRC, Erik Prince is an open imperialist, and by that I don't mean that I'm labeling him that. I'm saying that he has talked about on his own podcast, because he has his own podcast, that essentially all of Africa and all of Latin America they're unable to govern themselves, and they need Westerners in charge, running their countries.
We need douchebags like him to.
I've seen one interpretation. So essentially, following what's called the Nisur massacre, where it was confirmed that Blackwater, his operation at the time, killed 17 civilians and injured many more in an attack. He kind of lost favor in Washington and had to shift gears, open up new operations with new names. He actually moved to China for a period of time, or sorry, not to China, excuse me, to the DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo, where he was working for both Chinese interests and American interests there. To the point where he essentially is an unofficial ambassador for the Trump administration at this point in the DRC.
Wow.
I've in a couple articles ago where I wrote about him, because I have a few articles on the drone campaign. There were some analysts who thought that he was basically trying to curry favor with the Trump administration, and he was doing it by going directly to governments where he thought Trump would be happy that he was helping out as he saw it. I can't confirm that. Maybe just that that's what he's telling the public, and that in fact it is Trump administration who is calling him. All this to say that he has been operating in Haiti for just under a year under the company's name is Vectis Global, and they are there to run a explosive kamikaze drone campaign in order to defeat the gangs or defeat the armed groups, which I mentioned earlier has been completely unsuccessful. Not one major leader of an armed group has been killed.
But plenty of civilians, though.
But plenty of civilians, and because we have this issue, of it's very easy to just dismiss a casualty in this war as being a so-called gang member. That the UN especially through these reports, but also the mainstream media can just say, look, we went and we killed the bad guys, they're gang members. There's no follow through to actually establish that they were themselves members of armed groups. So the conclusion that I've come to and others have come to as well, that the majority of the people who are dying in this war are themselves civilians, often people who live in territory that are controlled by armed groups.
Talk talk a bit more about the UN's Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights and its role. You believe in just minimizing, and these are my words, not your words, but basically pissing on the graves of Haitians who are being collectively punished and murdered with impunity by Western imperialists pretending to be anti-gang violence officers.
Yeah. So, I mean, I should start with the fact that this gang suppression force is there to support the police there. The gang suppression force is just an upgrade to the force that was there earlier, and this force is contrary to international law. International law doesn't allow for Washington and Canada to pay for a bunch of Kenyans to arm themselves and go into another country to do their bidding. This is not like MINUSTA that occupied Haiti for years, or MINUSMA who occupied Haiti, Mali for years. So there's that context. So the UN as an institution has an interest in sort of covering for the crimes of not just the force that they've blessed and helped facilitate, but also to inflate the numbers to make it look like it's successful. So these BINU reports, I've been following closely, and so have other analysts, and they've established on their end that the vast majority of the deaths are caused by the PNH and their paramilitary groups. So, by paramilitary groups, I mean
so the police themselves.
The police themselves, absolutely. Being back largely them, they certainly take up the largest percentage. The 62% of the deaths are caused by them. Yeah, another 8% that are caused by paramilitary groups. These are what I think are erroneously referred to now as vigilance brigades or even Bois Calais. Bois Calais is was a spontaneous anti-gang movement that sprang up a couple of years ago, where citizens basically just rose up in frustration and anger, gathered weapons, and went and took out the local gang who had been murdering, kidnapping, and so on and so forth. Often with the help of local police officers, but not being led by them. So very different in character. Now it's largely understood that these groups that are they've tried to take on the mantle of Bois Calais, but are actually paramilitary groups that themselves backed by politicians and oligarchs, are working with the PNH. They'll go into these territories controlled by Vivre Ensemble, and they've been very blunt. There's several interviews, a couple that I cite in the article, where PNH officers will be very blunt and say, we just assume everyone is a gang member in the neighborhoods, and we just shoot first. We don't check to see if they're carrying a weapon, let alone try to confirm if they're a member of Vivre Ensemble. If you live in these neighborhoods, you are a target. So with those stats in mind, that the vast majority of the deaths are being caused by the police, working with Vectis Global, working with Erik Prince's operation, working in part with the army, who is a considerably small force by comparison.
Yeah.
Then the upwards of 32, probably closer to 22% of the deaths are caused by members of Vivre Ensemble. And in those cases, it's arguable the majority of the people that they're killing are inter-paramilitary and Vivre Ensemble attacks. So it's attack reprisal between these groups. But the UN has an interest in conflating living in a territory controlled by Vivre Ensemble with being an actual member of a gang. So it's very likely that the majority of the people that are being killed are not themselves gang members, because the UN uses the same language. They call them gang members, but they have actually no process for confirming this. So all you need is someone else on the ground saying, "Yep, that was a gang member," and that's enough. They've been they're filed under gang member, and the UN can say, "Look at the successes we're having, where we've killed X number of thousand of gang members, and yet very little changes on the ground." They've managed to clear out a small part of the downtown area in Port-au-Prince, but for the most part, these armed groups still control the territory they controlled months ago.
Wow, unbelievable. And actually, let me ask this question. It's a follow-up question. I wasn't planning on asking this, but I do have to ask this because it just comes up in my mind every time I cover Haiti, and I'm just outraged at what Haiti is subjected to. Now, I remember I recently was watching 2 weeks ago I was watching on Netflix two different documentaries and a kind of docudrama about when the Cosa Nostra, the original Sicilian mafia, had a huge grip on on the Italian body politics and state of affairs, and they were getting way too powerful, way too big for their own boots, to the point where they were assassinating journalists, they were assassinating lawyers, they were assassinating judges who were trying to prosecute them. It was outrageous. It was outrageous, and at some point, enough people were protesting that the state had to do something and had to basically, arrest a bunch of mobsters and put them in jail. Some of them punished very harshly and whatnot. And but still, it was such an awful period, and the assassinations were so extreme. The car bombs and so forth were so extreme, killed so many other innocent people, and I just I just can't think of of the UN saying, "Man, these Italians, they just don't know how to govern themselves. They're way too out of control with the mafia. Ergo, let's send in a UN peacekeeping force and just eradicate these mobsters and okay, we think that's a mobster right there. Okay, we think that one's working for the mobster right there. So police, have fun with your law and order." I'm curious your response to that, because it's just utterly outrageous. And in fact, when the U.S. even tries to violate other countries' sovereignty under the banner that they're a failed state that's in the grip of narco terrorists and sort of like that, like with Colombia, like with Mexico, the proper response is that the proper response is outrage, especially when real journalists who do their homework know that if there is a drug cartel problem, if there is an organized crime problem, it's because of the effing U.S. and their allies and whatnot. I'm curious your response to that before I ask my
I mean, Dr. Jimmy Pierre shares a lot of the frustrations you're talking about. Trinidad and Tobago is currently in a state of emergency because of gangs there. There's no talk of sending in a bunch of Kenyans to support the police there and start murdering poor people. Mexico, Donald Trump wants to bomb it, but there's no talk of a UN force going there. Jamaica, there's you can come up with all these examples. So it's kind of further evidence that there is something else going on in Haiti, that despite the vile nature of some of these leaders within Vive Ensemble, that they overlap with, to a degree, with the interests of the poor, that were they to be successfully eradicated, we would have a return to the status quo, which means that Haiti remains a neo-colony and remains as crushingly poor as is. And I should emphasize, I recommend everyone go watch the documentary, Another Vision. It would just help in terms of some of the visuals to see that some of these neighborhoods, people live in raw sewage, live in garbage perpetually. In fact, families are having to bury loved ones in landfills. This is the degree of humiliation and deprivation that Haitians living in the slums are forced to live with, and that will not change if the GSF Erik Prince and so on are successful in taking out these leaders. The status quo is also unacceptable. There was a recent study that came out. The organization name is IRAP. I can't remember what the acronym stands for right now, but essentially an organization that came together in order to survey over 500 Haitians living in Port-au-Prince to ask them what they thought about dialogue and what they with armed groups. And a reminder that Jimmy Sherry's popularity plummeted once he decided to ally with these other leaders upon Vivre Ensemble being established, and that it hasn't recovered since. So they found that roughly half of people are interested to one degree or another in engaging in dialogue. That's important because the only way that they're going to disarm is if they feel like they have a voice in the process, and I'll get into that in a second. The other interesting point was that members of armed groups, members of the population, members of paramilitary groups, these groups that are again backed by politicians and oligarchs and armed by them, often spoke about it, just like level of complete exhaustion, living in constant paranoia, constant violence, never knowing if the person around the corner is going to pull out a gun and shoot you. This kind of feeling. So there's a desire for dialogue leading towards some kind of reconciliation that's growing. That seems to be the case. The other thing I point out in my article is that while the UN can accurately find cases of children who've been recruited by armed groups, I mean, recruited is the wrong word, who've been coerced into joining armed groups, and that's certainly the case, and it can't be denied. You can also find in other neighborhoods younger people who repeat this message of like a revolutionary message that you'll hear Jimmy Sherry talking about. And any analyst who's talking about Haiti from the West, whether in the diaspora or not, have to wrestle with these facts. You can't just ignore the fact that some of these young people actually have heard this message and it appeals to them, and they've decided that they would rather die than return to the squalor that they came from. That again is not to ignore the fact that some of these armed groups are actively involved in what could be called child trafficking, in the sense that they are recruiting or coercing children into joining armed groups. But that again points out the reality that, first of all, something like, I can't remember the percentage right now, it's in my article, but a huge number of Haiti citizens themselves are children, or at least under 18. And if these neighborhoods controlled by armed groups and a growing number of the membership, whether coerced or not, are members of armed groups, that if you support the gang suppression force, then what you're saying is that they are all going to be murdered. That is the only solution. And that's the kind of solution that you would get from the IDF, that we just have to murder our way through this neighborhood to kill the bad guys. And if there's a lot of collateral damage, well, at least the bad guys are dead. The consequence of either ignoring the dynamics on the ground and simultaneously saying, well, I don't really like the JSF, I don't like US imperialism, but what you going to do because we need to take out the leaders, the consequences will be that thousands of civilians, the regular Haitians, are going to be killed, and a huge number of them are going to be children. So hence the need for dialogue, hence engage in this like a process of reconciliation that's on the ground. As far as what analysts and commentators can do in North America is to stop ignoring the complexity of the situation on the ground and start acknowledging it and trying to explain it to the audience, because we're not serving anyone's interest by trying to essentially blackbill the audience by saying, so there's like these evil gangs and there's like this evil imperialist government and Haitians are screwed, which is unfortunately the message of a handful of Haiti commentators right now.
Now, Travis, I've been, so depressed with the state of affairs, with the kidnapping of Maduro and his wife, the fall of the Syrian Arab Republic, Israel's ongoing mass murder, genocide in all of historic Palestine and Lebanon, the war in Iran, and seeing the avalanche of pro-war, economic terrorism and and Iranian diaspora folks who support the U.S. and Israel's multi-layered conquest of their country. And I think if the U.S. is allowed to continue, their latest upping the economic blockade of Cuba, we could very well see the end of the Cuban Revolution and its system fall. I say all of this, because Haiti, and I say all of this while Haiti continues to be criminally overlooked, and there continues to be a lack of the kind of solidarity Iran, Cuba, Yemen, Palestine, and excuse me, and Lebanon have. And one of my favorite movies is The International. And the Clive Owen character confronts this evil, dodgy banker who asks him, "What do you want?" And the character responds, going, sorry for the F-bomb, folks, I want some fucking justice. So that being said, when will Haiti stop being thrown under the bus by the Latin American, Caribbean left, much of Africa, regardless of where you are on the political spectrum of that complex continent, and Haiti be allowed to flourish into the beautiful, peaceful country it deserves to be and aspires to be?
Yeah, I mean, my assessment of what's going on in the world right now is like similar to yours. Like, there's a couple of regions that are nonetheless provide some inspiration. The resistance in Iran is one of them. But the Alliance of Sahel States, the AES, in Africa is certainly one of them. And I think that actually does connect to Haiti, and I'll explain in a second. But Haiti's main allies are under attack right now. Haiti's main allies in Latin America and the Caribbean are Cuba and Venezuela. So the fact that those two main allies are just trying to hold it together internally, the likelihood of there being any international solidarity, a significant one, is low. And there was a handful of leaders who seemed to understand the complexity on the ground, but they're the minority. So CARICOM, which is the kind of governing regional body for the in the Caribbean, where they could point to a couple of members that seem to have a loose understanding of what's happening on the ground, they're in a minority. CARICOM functions essentially in service to U.S. empire, just like the OAS does, Organization of American States, in Latin America. We look to Latin America, and where we see leaders like Lula or Sheinbaum seeming to have a loose understanding of what's happening in Venezuela and Cuba. So far, I'm not aware of any concrete action to actually oppose other than through words. And any Haiti watcher would know that Lula threw Haiti under the bus in 2004. It was Brazilians that made up the vast majority of the MINUSTA force that went in to kind of solidify the dictatorship that had been put in place following the coup against Jean Bertrand Aristide and Famille Lavalasse, the vanguard of democracy at the time. So Haiti's friends are under attack, and there are very few of them in the first place in the Americas, at least we're talking governments in the Caribbean. So when I look for hope, I do look towards continental Africa, because whereas Haiti may be geographically detached from Africa, I would say that among all the Caribbean countries, it has managed to maintain its Africanity more than any other, and it is an African country. It is largely a language barrier that's in place. The leaders of the AES, to a degree, have their eye on Haiti.
If Gibraltar is part of the United Kingdom, Haiti is part of Africa, and
it's
an honorable part of Africa.
Good analogy, thank you.
And it's an honorary of Africa.
So yeah, I look to the AES for inspiration generally when things get dark, as they are now. But specifically for Haiti, I think it's somewhere to look, and these are my reasons why. Ibrahim Traore, leader of Burkina Faso, I think he's now the president of the AES. He has his eye on Haiti. They're understandably focused on internal matters and defending themselves from the so-called Islamic terrorists that are flooding in, the ISIS and Al-Qaeda related terrorists in the region. who are in all likelihood financed and supported by the United States. But nonetheless, Ibrahim Traore did bring up, he's great at giving speeches, so he's got lots of them, but there's one particular speech that he gave where he started listing African leaders who've been assassinated by by the imperialists, by the United States and their allies, Lumumba, Sankara, and so on. And he's very much following Sankara's tradition. And he threw in Jovenel Moise in there. Jovenel Moise, I don't want to go on a tangent with them, but there's a lot of debate over where he was before he was assassinated. He was undoubtedly a servant of the oligarchy when he came into office. But it very much seems like for one reason or another, right before he was being assassinated, whether it's to cover himself because he didn't like the legacy that was going to be left behind as a obvious servant, or he had actually decided to change and wanted to challenge the oligarchs. And that's why he was assassinated. That's not clear. Nonetheless, there's a sector of the Haitian population who you call Jovenelists, people who support Jovenel Moise, who are not themselves pro-gangster fascists themselves. They see him as somebody who was like from the countryside, which is true, abused by the oligarchy, and in the end was fighting for the interests of Haitians, especially in the countryside. And I think this interpretation has been passed on to Ibrahim Traore. Hence, he was included in this list of assassinated leaders. How did he get that information? I can't say for sure, but there's a Pan-Africanist activist named Kemi Seba, who himself is Beninese, but he has been actively involved in growing the Pan-Africanist movement in the region. Benin is a borders Nigeria and some of the Sahel states. And he has an eye on Haiti. In fact, he went to Haiti last summer. He visited. And when he visited, his message to the very surprised academic and NGO class was that they should join forces with Vivre Ensemble because Vivre Ensemble had the potential to become a revolutionary force to take out the oligarchy and take out the US-controlled corporate political class and essentially form a revolution. That didn't get a lot of press, in part because, who's paying attention to what a Beninese activist, Pan-Africanist says in Haiti, but also because it's not what they wanted to hear. They did not want somebody coming in and telling these academics, these NGO class people who themselves are dependent largely on money coming out of the United States, Canada, and France to pay their bills, to be told you should be joining forces with them and you should be like essentially forming a vanguard and they will become your liberation army. That connection to the Sahel and to Haiti is what gives me hope, is that the Sahel Alliance, the AES, is able to grow and continue to prosper and possibly expand. Some of my research and one article I did was based on the West African states that all border the southern part of the AES. And the US has been pouring a lot of attention into that region because they do not want the AES to expand. So they're supporting the autocrat in Benin because they know that Kemi Seba, who ran for president, would join the AES. They have arguably, I'll have to use the word allegedly, tried to assassinate the leader of Ghana because he is very open to growing relations with the AES. Can't be, and the same for Togo. Can't be said for Cote d'Ivoire because Cote d'Ivoire is essentially a neo-colony of the United States and like totally beholden to U.S. imperialism there. But there is a growing interest in the countries surrounding the AES and the Sahel region, the West Africa, the Horn of West Africa, and join the AES. And were it to grow, it would grow in power, grow in authority, grow in influence. And this is only something that could benefit Haiti with people like Ibrahim Traore and Kemi Seba and hopefully others who have their eye on Haiti and understand that it is more complex than just bad guy gangsters versus bad guy politicians, again, blackpilling the audience into there's no hope for Haiti, and possibly offering some kind of support. I can't say what it would be for the future, because if the United States under Donald Trump over the next few years is able to, or desires to, because the whims of his administration, to pour more money into this gang suppression force, more money will translate into more soldiers, more police officers, and that you could see a scenario where they could overwhelm the leaders of Viva Assam and successfully assassinate them. It's a guarantee that the imperialists and that the people who serve their interests in the United States, the Comprador political class, do not want to engage in dialogue with these groups. They do not want this to happen because through this process, the interests of the people who are, having to bury their loved ones in garbage, who are having to live every day in sewage, and so on, that their interests will have to be addressed. And doing so, the power of the oligarchs and the wealth of the oligarchs and their servants will be diminished.
Well, it's like anything, we just have to step up our efforts when it comes to Haitian solidarity, and we'll keep trying our best to do that. Well, that's a perfect place to end. Well, we were joined on this edition of 1+1, our All Things Haiti edition, with our returning champion, Travis Ross. Again, a contributor to Haiti Liberté, the Canada Files, Black Agenda Report, and co-editor of the Canada Haiti Information Project. And again, before we leave, just a reminder to folks to please share 1+1 widely. Sometimes Facebook blocks my ability to share, so it's very important that people share. It's our only way of overcoming the far-right algorithms and the monopoly that Western corporate media have on us. And again, please, if folks can, check out the work of my friend Chris Richards, the Eclectic Radical, and become a Patreon to his because he is struggling with unemployment. And by supporting his journalism and becoming a Patreon of his, trust me, folks, you're helping me. And again, who needs Spotify when you have when you have YouTube that gives free music? And so again, folks, if you donate to Chris, you really are helping me out as well. And again, going to be joining his live stream this Sunday, 11 a.m. DC Eastern Time, 8 a.m. Oregon time. So adjust your clocks accordingly. And until then, Travis, thank you so much for reaching out and coming back on the program. I look forward to having you back on the program hopefully soon, because again, Haiti is criminally overlooked and it deserves more attention. And I even have an entire playlist on all the episodes we've done on Haiti and other related stuff. So do come back on. And until then, folks, good night and good luck, and see you then.